Let go. Two monks walked in silence along a path covered with fallen leaves. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant sound of water hinted at the presence of a nearby river. Upon reaching the shore, they saw a young woman dressed in fine clothes, staring at the water with concern. The current was strong, and the nearest bridge was too far away. Without hesitation, the elder monk approached her. "Miss, do you need help crossing?" he asked calmly. The woman nodded gratefully. Without saying more, the monk picked her up in his arms and carefully carried her to the other shore. The younger monk watched the scene with wide eyes but said nothing. Once they were on the other side, the woman bowed her head in gratitude and continued on her way. The monks resumed their journey, silently advancing along the moss-covered path. The path wound its way through the trees, and the sound of the river faded behind them. The monks continued in silence, but the younger monk's mind was troubled. With every step, words bubbled up inside him like drops of water falling into a pond. Monks should not touch women. It is in our teachings. It is a sacred rule. He glanced sideways at his companion, who walked with the same serenity as always, as if nothing had happened. The sun began to descend on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and orange hues. They passed a small village without stopping, then returned to the forest, where the air was cooler. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, the younger monk furrowed his brow and broke the silence. "Brother," he said with a tense voice, "how could you carry that woman? We have vows. We are not supposed to touch any." The elder monk walked a few more steps before stopping. He turned his head and looked at his companion with a slight smile. "I left her on the shore hours ago," he said softly. "Why are you still carrying her?" The younger monk stopped dead in his tracks. His companion's response hit him like a gust of wind in the calm. Still carrying her? He felt a knot in his chest. He wanted to respond to justify his reproach, but he realized that his thoughts were still clinging to the scene at the river. His mind had traveled back time and again to the moment when the elder monk had picked the woman up. The elder, in contrast, walked with the lightness of one who has left behind what has already passed. They resumed walking in silence. Now, each step of the younger monk was heavy with reflection. He wondered how many times in his life he had carried unnecessary burdens. Words spoken by others, past mistakes, judgments. Night began to envelop the forest. Soon they would find shelter for the night. But within the younger monk, another journey was beginning, one towards understanding and true freedom. The path narrowed as the moon peeked through the branches. The younger monk continued walking in silence, but his mind was now focused on something else. How many times have I carried invisible burdens? He remembered the times he had felt resentment for words from others, the moments when he had replayed past mistakes, trapped in thoughts that held him back. He looked at his companion, who walked calmly as though nothing weighed on him. He had left the woman at the shore, and I am still carrying her. He sighed and felt something loosen in his chest. It was as if, by realizing his attachment, he had let go of some of his burden. The forest opened up into a clearing, where they found a small abandoned cabin. There they would spend the night. The younger monk started a fire, watching the flames dance gently in the darkness. "Brother," he finally said, "I think I understand now." The elder monk smiled, but said nothing. He simply nodded, allowing silence to speak for itself. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, but inside, all was calm. The younger monk watched the flames, feeling his mind gradually become clearer. "My whole life," he said quietly, "I have followed the rules with devotion, believing that discipline alone would make me free. But today, he paused. Today I realize that I have been a prisoner of my own judgment. The elder monk looked at him serenely. Rules are like a boat to cross the river, he said softly. But once you've crossed, do you still carry the boat on your shoulders? The younger monk closed his eyes for a moment. He understood what his brother was saying. Rules were guides, not chains. He should not cling to them without understanding, but learn to let go when they were no longer necessary. He felt something inside him unravel, like snow melting in the warmth of the sun. That night, for the first time in a long time, he slept without burdens in his heart. Dawn brought with it fresh, pure air. The first rays of the sun filtered through the leaves, casting golden hues on the forest. The younger monk opened his eyes feeling light, as if he had left behind a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying. His companion was already awake, sitting in meditation before the extinguished fire. His expression was serene, at peace with the world and with himself. The younger monk sat beside him and closed his eyes. This time, his mind was not trapped in thoughts of the past or worries for the future. Only the present existed. The whisper of the wind, the distant song of a bird, the crunch of leaves beneath his crossed legs. Everything was exactly as it should be. They remained in silence for a long time until the younger monk spoke. "Brother, how do you manage to let go so easily?" The elder monk opened his eyes with a slight smile. "It's not that I let go," he replied. "It's that I never hold on." The younger monk felt another wave of understanding. It wasn't about learning to let go, but about not clinging from the very beginning. He breathed deeply and smiled. The sun slowly rose above the horizon as the monks resumed their journey. The dew-covered path reflected the morning light with a soft glow. The younger monk walked with a new feeling inside him. Something had changed in his step. He no longer felt the need to speak, to question, to hold on to unnecessary thoughts. He simply walked, present in each step, feeling the earth beneath his feet and the breeze caressing his face. They passed by a stream, and the clear water reminded him of the river from the day before. But this time, there was no conflict in his mind. The water flows without clinging to anything. Suddenly, he saw his companion stop and point to a fallen tree blocking the path. Without hesitation, the monks bent down to move it together. The younger monk felt the rough wood in his hands, the shared weight, the effort of pushing. And then he understood something else. Just as we helped move this log, yesterday we helped a woman cross a river. There was nothing more to it. When they finally cleared the path, the young monk smiled. There were no rules to break or attachments to hold. Just actions in the present, without weight, without burden. The path continued ahead, winding along hills covered in grass and wildflowers. The young monk felt the world in a different way now. Every sound, every scent, every breeze on his skin was new, as if he had never truly experienced them before. Around a bend in the path, they saw an elderly man sitting on a stone. His clothes were worn with age, and his gaze was lost in the horizon. The monks stopped in front of him. "Good morning, old man," greeted the elder monk respectfully. "Are you well?" The old man slowly turned his head and smiled. "I've been sitting here all morning thinking about the mistakes of my youth," he responded in a slow voice. "The words I spoke and the ones I didn't, the decisions I made and the ones I didn't make." The young monk listened attentively. "And the more I think about it," the old man continued, "the heavier my heart becomes." The elder monk leaned slightly toward him. "When you walk a long path," he said gently, "do you pick up stones and carry them with you?" The old man blinked and then let out a small laugh. "How foolish I've been," he murmured. carrying a weight that no longer exists. The young monk smiled upon hearing those words. He had learned the same thing the previous night. The old man sighed deeply, as though releasing an invisible sack of stones. All my life, I've carried things that no longer exist, he murmured. But today I leave them here. The monks nodded with a slight bow and continued on their way. As they walked, the young monk felt a deep respect for the lesson they had just witnessed. The burdens we carry in our minds, he said softly, are the heaviest of all. The elder monk smiled. And yet, they exist nowhere except in ourselves. The young monk reflected in silence. He understood that suffering did not come from what happened in life, but from the way one held it. They passed another river, calmer than the previous one. The waters flowed gently, not holding on to anything, not resisting. The young monk paused for a moment and looked at the reflection of the sky in the surface. This is how the mind should be, he thought, like the water that lets everything pass and doesn't cling to anything. He took a deep breath and continued walking. There was nothing left to carry. The sun was beginning to set, coloring the sky with pink and golden hues, while the two monks continued their walk. The cool afternoon air wrapped around them in a profound stillness, and for the first time in a long while, the young monk felt a peace that did not depend on anything external. They had left behind the river, the old man, and all the lessons they had learned on the way. But the most important one still stayed with them: the art of letting go, the art of not clinging. At the end of the path, the trees opened up and a vast, open meadow appeared before them. The young monk looked at the horizon, where the sun was setting, and for a moment, the feeling of being in the world and of not being in it mixed in his heart. Everything was perfect as it was. No need to change anything. The elder monk, feeling the same peace, glanced at his disciple. "This is the way," he said softly. "Just walk, without burden, without attachment." And with those words, both sat in silence, watching the landscape fade with the twilight, knowing that there was nothing more to do, only to be. Thus, at the end of the day, they let go.